Hello, everyone, and thank you to our climate justice panel today. City Council member Mike O'Brien will hopefully be walking through the door soon. If not, we definitely have Mayor Mike McGinn, the one and only, and City Council candidate Kshama Sawant. And these are our candidates that we've endorsed through Divest UW and now Confronting Climate Change, our new group. Hello. And hello, everyone. Didn't say hello to Mike O'Brien, our City Council member. Our panel is now complete. So, as I was saying, these are the candidates we chose to endorse based on their policy agendas. As you all know, the mayor has been a leading and probably the most prominent leading local politician on environmental issues in decades. So he's a phenomenal candidate. Kshama Sawant not only supports divestment, her campaign is fully divested from all corporations, which we find phenomenal. And of course, Mike O'Brien, he was present at our very first rally. He was our keynote speaker. He's a long-term supporter of divestment. And we're just very happy to have him here to speak to all of you and to provide their perspectives on climate action and climate development at a policy level, as well as local issues that they want to address. This panel began with an open letter. The mayor might say it was his, I might say it's mine. He wrote a letter to Harvard, which was phenomenal. And I was very, very inspired by it when I read it. And then I wrote an open letter in response to the mayor asking for local action here. His senior advisor, within just a couple of days, reached out to us and said we could do much better than a letter. We could set up a forum or actually just a presentation. And we were delighted to have that because we want everyone to engage these candidates. With the mayor now here, I also been asked to have all of our candidates present, and of course they all are, and we're very excited to have them here. We are here basically primarily because of divestment. That's what brought us together. In January, we started a movement. Our three leaders here joined in April. The movement was started by Robbie, who's right here, and with Kyle Marsh, who might be here. With Kyle Murphy, Robert Marsh and Kyle Murphy, I missed you, who's actually with two of the candidates' campaigns right now. And we're very proud to have them here. They led us, basically the Board of Regents. They took us and our mission up there, and then they had to graduate, tragically, in the campaign. Since then, we've taken over. We spent the summer negotiating with the Treasury and presented just this month 5 climate change initiatives, which aren't what we want in terms of investment, but they represent a big step forward in terms of driving institutions to adopt greener finance. One of our initiatives was the adoption of ESG, which is environmental, social, and corporate governance factors, which, as the 2 Sierra Club candidates here will definitely know, that is the first step the Sierra Club took toward divestment. We also endorsed social shareholder activism. And shareholder activism we're not the strongest proponents of, but it is what a lot of liberals and moderates present as the first step or the alternative investment. And so we'd like to see it in action, because we do believe that it works at the local level in terms of small, localized conflicts. It can be very important. We don't see it changing industry trends, but we still need to see it in action because it is always presented as an alternative to divestment. Until it's actually adopted, it will not be, divestment will never come. And the last, we just pushed through $25 more million in green investment at the university. But we need more, and because of that, we're constantly trying to find policy answers to our climate issues, and that's what we really want the candidates here to address. Before we do, Sarah's going to speak to why we organize and why we fight, and kind of demonstrate how very few actors can inspire quite a bit of change in very little time.
Hi, good evening, and thank you again for coming. So, you're all here at a climate justice panel, so I assume, like most rational people, you too are also worried about climate change. And for good reason. The new IPCC report says we have a window of opportunity to prevent this trajectory of spiraling into a positive feedback loops that would perpetuate climate change into an unstoppable force. Now that window that we have says that we need a peak carbon emissions by 2020. That gives us 7 years. This is the greatest problem of our generation. And because that we have the ability to change during that window of opportunity. Now, many people say, well, what can we do? Sure, you can ride your bicycle and you can recycle your cans, and that's all important, but that's not going to save the world. Now, let it be clear that it's not your fault that your mom drives an SUV or that your uncle works at the oil refinery. You see, we cannot blame the products of the system. What we need to do is change the defected system. For too long, the fossil fuel industry has kept a monopoly on the energy sector. Now, renewable energy is comparable to oil. The only difference is that the tax write-offs and government subsidies and the fact that they don't have to pay a carbon tax gives oil an unfair advantage. Changing this will change the world. Now, many people tell me, well, I'm only one person. But like Margaret Mead said, never underestimate the power of a few committed people to change the world. Indeed, it is the only thing that ever has. Now, tell me again that you're only one person, but a group of people filled the room last Wednesday to talk to the governor about their concerns about climate change. And by Monday, the governor and all the governors of the West Coast came together working on limiting carbon. Although we have many supporters, Divest UW's policy team of 5 people in less than 1 year has presented in front of the Board of Regents 3 times and has gotten the UW Treasury Department to not only research but create policy because of our demands. Now, you may be only one person, but Ben Peterson, who was only one person, created a letter that reached out to the mayor, and in 3 days, these 4 people have organized this event. Now, if 4 people can do this in 3 days, can you imagine if this room joined us? We would be an unstoppable force. So if you join me, if you want to become part of the solution, and be sure to sign up on our mailing list. And thanks again for coming out.
Hello, everyone. My name is Carter Case. I'm one of the other leaders with these fine people behind me and Alex in front of me. I just wanted to talk a little bit about some of the local issues that we see from climate change, because everyone likes to talk about carbon dioxide emissions, and we have these many parts per million in the atmosphere, but it's hard to see that in the context of how it impacts Washington State. So there are 3 major issues that we're dealing with currently. One of those, as I'm sure a lot of you know, the coal train proposals and the coal export terminals that are planned for areas near Bellingham and Longview, down on the southern part of the coast. Peabody Coal is trying to push that coal through our cities and towns, potentially exposing us to hazardous material from coal dust in these uncovered carts. This is one of the issues that we're very passionate about as well. And should coal exports happen and go to Asian markets, it's just going to mean that more countries are going to burn more fossil fuels. And it's overall just bad for our system and bad for perpetuating what already doesn't work. Another thing that's really troubling for our region is the cuts to Metro that are on the ballot right now. King County Metro can't afford to maintain the bus routes that it has currently, which a lot of people depend on to transport themselves to work, into school. And if we see cuts in those, more people are going to end up driving cars, and the traffic problems that we see are a huge reason why we see climate change in our region. MIT researchers estimate that 53,000 people die prematurely each year from automobile emissions, which is a major issue. The third thing I'd like to talk about is ocean acidification. The $270 million shellfish industry in Washington State is at risk because shellfish, like oysters, can't form calcium carbonate shells and are dying out in Hood Canal in places where shellfish farmers depend on them for their livelihoods. And if we don't face these problems now, they only stand to get worse. So I'd like to transition to these three wonderful people next to me. Councilor O'Brien, I lead the voters.
Sure. Are these live or? Yeah.
Just leave it on the phone.
What's that?
Just leave it on the phone.
They're like, no.
Are they? Hello?
Hello? There we go. Thank you all so much for organizing this, and I apologize for being late, but your comment was great. I was passed by two buses that were full at the convention center, and it's so frustrating trying to do the right thing we can. The idea that we're not talking about expanding our transit system instead of trying to preserve it is absurd. And I apologize I have to run after I speak because I have another event I have to get to, but I really appreciate the organizing you did, and what you guys said is right. You know, when we come together, it's amazing what we can accomplish. The power in the room at the governor's hearing on Wednesday was incredible to hear. And it's great to see the action that's already happening with the governors on the West Coast and British Columbia coming together to talk about pricing carbon. We absolutely need to do that. I'm going to talk just about investment for a second. The mayor held a great conference here in Seattle a couple weeks ago, bringing national experts into town. I had a chance to attend about half the sessions there. And I can tell you, when sometimes we talk about divestment, people kind of roll their eyes and think like, okay, this is kind of crazy stuff. It was amazing to have a room full of people dressed in suit and ties who are financial experts talking seriously about how we divest our economy. These are people that are in the investment world from Wall Street and other places saying you can absolutely do this. I am working currently on a resolution for the city of Seattle to set a policy to create the environmental, social, and governance screen for our investments. We don't have total control over these boards. They're independent bodies of the city, but we can certainly give them direction and ask them to come back with some proposals on how we manage and invest our billions of dollars of the city that's tied up. And we're seeing other cities around the country do that, which is an amazing thing. One thing I just want to mention really briefly, it's something that's on the ballot, Proposition 1. It's about creating a public financing option for city council races. And I want to mention it because the money in politics creates an amazingly corrosive influence on our democracy. And whether your issue is climate change, or whether it's safe gun laws, or whether it's health care or education, whatever it is, until we can start to pull the money, the bad money, out of politics, we're going to continue to be losing these fights. And we'll have rooms full of people that say this is the right thing to do, and yet we won't get our leaders to do it because of the way money plays. We're already seeing that a little bit. I talked about Kshama's entrance into the city council race, and her presence here, talking about $15 an hour minimum wage, has made all of us on city council and mayor's race. This is an issue now we have to discuss. And with public financing and city council races, we would have so many more people that would be credible, viewed as credible candidates who can enter these races and raise topics that are important to the community and force all of us to have a real discussion about the issues that matter to the people. And so that is an amazing thing that we can do going forward. I got to run, so I'm going to pass this off to whoever's next. But thank you all so much for organizing this and giving me a chance to say hi to you all.
Thank you, Mike. Next, I believe Dr. Sawant. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilmember McGinn, O'Brien. They're both Mike.
He's younger and better looking. Come on. I'm used to it. I can take it. Go ahead,
And
Kshama.
you're both good looking.
Oh, thank you. You're so sweet.
So I wanted to thank the divestment group, Ben and Sarah and Carter, Alex, everybody. I was talking to them in the hallway and I was saying, as an activist myself, I know how much work that goes into organizing an event of this size, and to pull this off, I think is a testament to their tremendous organizing abilities, which is something that all of you young people should be developing, and also to the changing environment that we're living in, where I don't just mean like the physical environment, but the social and political environment that we are in, where people are starting to wake up on many issues. And this election year has been so different than your business as usual election year, and I think that's should be the take-home message. You know, what can bring about change is your involvement. And as Sarah said, never doubt what one person can do, because when you do it, others are going to be empowered, going to feel empowered to do the same, and that's what's important. I also wanted to thank both Councilmember Ryan and Mayor McGinn for being here for this very important discussion. I think that is what leadership is, where you're willing to make time for a passionate group of students, even during a really busy election campaign, during the last few days of your campaign. And the fact that candidates are prioritizing this event shows that they care about what people are thinking, and that the issue itself is very important. And I wanted to start by talking a little bit about where we come from, our campaign. I'm not sure how many of you are aware. And then I wanted to talk about Seattle, of course, and Washington State. But I also want us to have a larger conversation, because how could we possibly talk about climate change without talking about it as a global issue, as an international issue, because otherwise it's not meaningful. So I'm Kshama Sawant. I'm a member of Socialist Alternative, which is a nationwide organization of social and economic justice activists. We're also affiliated with an international organization called the Committee for Workers International. We're based in over 45 different countries, and that illustrates to you that it's a global movement. We are located in different countries like Nigeria, South Africa, the United Kingdom, Ireland, and so on. And in fact, through the Socialist Party of Ireland, which is our sister organization, we have a member in the Irish Parliament and a member in the European Parliament. So we're activists, but we don't shy away from electoral challenges as well. And I think it's important for us to point out that there isn't a dichotomy between electoral efforts and mass movements and work on the streets. I think we need to we need to occupy grassroots power everywhere politics has an influence. And as Michael Bryan was saying, there is so much influence of corporations in electoral politics. So it is tremendously beneficial for a grassroots campaign to be gaining ground, because it shows people an alternate way of capturing political space. So it's very important that we're here talking about this. I'm sure you're all well versed in the really scary statistics of what's happening. The record number of droughts that we've seen, 2011 and 2012 have been record-breaking drought years, and 80% of continental U.S. being in abnormally dry conditions, and half of the crops being labeled poor or very poor condition. And as an economist, as an economics teacher, I often talk about the environment from an economic standpoint, and I think it's impossible to have a meaningful discussion on the environment unless you also talk about the economics behind it, because what we're seeing is that despite such overwhelming evidence about climate change, about the connection, the causal link between carbon emissions and climate change, the increased severity of cyclones and other natural disasters, and despite the overwhelming evidence of how climate change and other environmental disasters disproportionately affect the poor, low-income people and poor countries, despite all this evidence, the question we should be asking, and it may be an uncomfortable question for us as environmental activists, but we have to ask, why is it that not only nothing has changed in the right direction, but emissions have gone up? What is going wrong? That is what we need to be talking about. We could spend a lot of time talking about the science of carbon emissions, and we should do that. However, I would like to focus whatever little time I have on the politics of environmental activism. And that's I think a very important thing for us to be talking about. I'll start by talking about Seattle, and then just to give you a sense of where we come from, our campaign and Socialist Alternative. We, as I'm sure many of you know, we were calling for $15 an hour since the beginning of last year when we ran a campaign for the State House of Representatives against House Speaker Frank Chop. And I think that's an example of how in any, not many, just any area of political change, social change, it's important to take, original leadership. So when we were calling for $15 an hour, people, most people's reaction was, that's too much, I don't know if that's going to work. But you can see the changed political environment this year, in the wake of the fast food workers' walkouts last December, their call for 15 and a union, and now the $15 an hour demand is gaining so much momentum that it is now on the ballot in CTAC. And we should all be in solidarity with that. If it passes, it will be an opening of a door for $15 an hour, a success in other places, including Seattle. And this year in our city council campaign, we are calling for $15 an hour. And we're also talking about a millionaire tax to fully fund mass transit and public education. And I think the question of mass transit is one of the most important things we should be talking about. In terms of what can Seattle do? What can Seattle do to combat climate change? One thing we should be doing, and we can do, is make Seattle a place of world-class mass transit. Why is Seattle lagging behind? Is it because we don't have money? This city is awash in wealth. How is it that we are in the 21st century and we're still talking about mass transit? It should have been done, and that's why that's one of the urgent things we need to be talking about. And Ben mentioned the 17% cuts. That is one of the things that we're looking into right away as we go into the next year. And the need for mass transit is not only in terms of maintaining the existing routes, but it's also a question of expanding the routes. And I often ask people to think of environmental issues and the carbon footprint not just by itself, but in relation to the local economy, in relation to economic issues, because that makes it so much more powerful and compelling. Because when you point out to people that the need for mass transit in Seattle is not only because we want to reduce carbon footprint, of course, which is a very important goal, but to address the fact that entire neighborhoods don't have access to viable transit. And they are mostly low-income communities, people of color, they tend to be predominantly immigrant communities, and that combined with the lack of affordable housing forces people to live on the margins of the city and have to live either 2 or 3 bus transfers away, which does not make your day viable because you spend so much time on the bus, or you're forced to drive a car which you can ill afford, and adding to the carbon emissions. So I think we have to talk about mass transit not only as a carbon footprint issue, but as a transit justice issue, and understand that there is an urgent need to fully fund Metro, because otherwise we're not going to have that happen. And that's why our campaign is boldly calling for a millionaire tax, and if people want to know more about it, I can go into it. And aside from that, we also need to talk about the coal trains. The Cherry Point coal terminal is in violation of any basic idea we have about climate change. I mean, it just flies in the face of everything that we know about climate change. And some of you may know a recent study from Greenpeace slated the terminal. If it went ahead, it's going to be one of the 10 worst projects to happen in the world in terms of its impact on climate change. Not to mention the skyrocketing that will be seen in respiratory illnesses. Not just in Bellingham, but in everywhere the trains are going to pass through, so including Spokane and Seattle and so on. And the violation of native land rights, because the terminal is going to be built on ancient burial ground of the Louis Nation. And so on so many levels, this is an objectionable project. And the question for us as environmental activists together is how do we stop this? And certainly it is, the city has taken a lead on speaking against it. However, I think we need to go deeper and face the fact that that Cherry Point terminal is not going to go out of commission. The idea is not going to go out of commission simply by that. It will require a mass movement. it will require us to take a stand on it, and not just one person or one elected official, but for all of us to be together in that. And the reason is that in order to stop it, you have to look at who is pushing for it. Who's pushing for it is BNSF, but not just BNSF. If you look at the financial underwriters of the terminal, it's financial corporations like Goldman Sachs. These are powerful financial behemoths who precipitated the financial collapse, causing an entire global economy to go belly up. These CEOs, these corporations are not going to stop by a resolution from government, from the city government. We need to go much further. We need to have a nonviolent civil disobedience movement against the coal terminal. So I have pledged that I will be part of that myself, and we have to be willing to put ourselves on the line in order to prevent that from happening. And I wanted to, I'm going on too long, so I'm going to just switch quickly to the question of what are the solutions for climate change on a global level. And I wanted to draw your attention, if you haven't seen it already. Yesterday, Naomi Klein published this article in the New Statesman, and the title of their article is "How Science is Telling Us All to Revolt." And in that, she quotes many different climate scientists talking about how their research is showing that our entire economic paradigm, I'm quoting her here, our entire economic paradigm is a threat to ecological stability. And indeed, that challenging this economic paradigm through mass movement counter-pressure is humanity's best shot at avoiding catastrophe. And I wanted to give some, put some numbers on that rhetoric to give us a real sense of what we're facing here. And, scientists have recommended that we at least hit the 2 degrees Celsius target, for climate change and for greenhouse gas emissions. And that, if you look at it statistically, that is going to require countries to cut greenhouse gas emissions, especially the industrialized countries, to cut their greenhouse gas emissions by something like 10% a year. And she really puts this in perspective. What is it going to take to bring about that kind of cut? And you can see that even with the most, most push, the most active push under, in the capitalist paradigm, we haven't come anywhere close to that kind of drop in emission. And in fact, the only times, see, this shows you the absurdity and dysfunction of the capitalist system. The only time that you have seen a bigger drop in emissions has been during recessions, and the drop is greater during some of the worst recessions. But even in the worst recession, which was the Great Depression, the drop was only 7%. A drop in greenhouse gas emissions. So what does this tell you? It shows you 2 things. One is that the system is so dysfunctional that it needs to perpetrate such misery. Recessions perpetrate misery on people. And it needs to do that in order to, and that's the only way it has the incentive to reduce emissions, because production goes down. That's the only way it happens, because all of production, virtually all of production requires fossil fuel under capitalism. And there is no incentive to move away, even though there's technology for renewable energy. And the other thing, it tells you that even with that misery, it's not coming anywhere close to the emissions we need every year if we are to come anywhere close, to have a 50-50 probability of hitting our target. And so it shows you that, it's not just socialists like myself who have come to this conclusion, it's environmental scientists and climate scientists who have come to this conclusion that we need a major shift, a fundamental shift away from the economic paradigm that we have. And I would urge you all, especially those of you who are in school here, to come and talk to socialist alternatives, and come and have a conversation with us to understand more about these questions, and we can talk more, but I'll stop there.
Next, Mayor McGinn, the floor is all yours.
Thank you, and we'll try to make sure we leave enough time for Q&A. How's that sound? Pretty good? Okay. So first of all, thank you for the invitation, and it was sent to me as mayor, and I responded as mayor, and so I'm not here as candidate McGinn, I'm here as mayor, and it was really important for me to respond, because the request was, could you write a letter to the UW Board of Regents asking them to divest? And my position is pretty clear on this, and actually I was much more interested in having a dialogue with you all, and because I think that these are very difficult political issues, and the organizing and the tactics about how you move forward are actually pretty critical. So and I'm pretty impressed with your summary at the front end of what you've done so far. I want to maybe nest this in a little bit of history for what it's worth. I'm going to put on my own timer here just so I know how long I go. So I graduated. I wasn't very active in politics in college. I graduated from college. About a year after college, I went to work for a U.S. congressman. And back then, the issue was whether or not the Northwest was going to build nuclear power plants to meet its energy needs. And what happened was, and what we're talking about here is the power of conventional wisdom. And the conventional wisdom at the time was that it was absolutely impossible to have economic growth without growth in energy output. And since we'd already dammed all of the major valleys and we're wringing all of the hydroelectric power that we could out of the Cascade Mountains and other places, the only way we could therefore have further economic growth was to produce more energy, and the only economical means to do so was to invest in 5 nuclear power plants that were called WUPs. And if you wanted to participate, Washington Public Power Supply System, the aptly named WUPs, and the leaders, the regional leaders, the elected leaders, the governors, the senators, the bureaucrats, everybody came together, and what they did was they began selling cities on the idea that you had to buy into the energy. You needed to invest in these long-term contracts, you needed to commit your money, because otherwise you'd be suffering rolling brownouts, you'd be suffering massive economic distress if you didn't have access to low-cost nuclear energy. It didn't work out that way. Right? It turned out that the nuclear energy was not at all economical. The nuclear power plants collapsed. It was a multi-billion-dollar bond default, and the lawyers got busy deciding who was going to be left holding the bag. The cities that signed the contracts, the ratepayers, the people that sold the bonds, the bondholders themselves. And interestingly, one of the architects of that, politically, they just continued to advance. The congressman I worked for was a guy by the name of Jim Weaver, Democrat from Eugene, Oregon. And he thought that this was a horrible scheme. And Joel Connolly just wrote about it, actually. And when asked what he'd do about it, he'd say, "What are you going to do to stop it?" He'd say, "I'm going to raise hell." That's what Jim would say. And so Jim actually held a filibuster on the House of Representatives to stop it. He lost, but he got some conservation provisions into the Northwest Power Planning Act. Well, the rest of the story is we've actually enjoyed incredible economic growth in the region, and we have done so with declining energy use per capita, and we managed to fit within the energy that we get from the hydro, and it just wasn't true that economic growth meant more energy use. In fact, now where we are is we're realizing that the less energy use, the more efficient you can be as a place. I mean, it's good to save that money, it's good to eliminate the pollution associated with it. And and by the way, the city of Seattle wisely decided not to buy into the nuclear power plants. And they did so because the public said, don't do it. And the city council listened, and we owned a publicly owned utility, and they said no. The next major step the city took was deciding that it was not going to buy power anymore from Centralia Coal Power Plant. And that was a major decision. It then exposed us to the vicissitudes of the market, and that was a rough time for the utility. We're now really long, meaning we have long-term contracts and stable power supplies in wind. We're expanding solar, we still have the hydro, and we're in a very stable position, and we do not rely on coal power. And the state has decided to close our only nuclear power plant. Now, Puget Sound Energy, which supplies a lot of the region, actually I think it's 40% of their power from the coal patch. So it brings us to, the coal train issue is another example of a pretty significant issue. And I got involved in that and put together a leadership coalition against it. It did make sense in a lot of different ways. But I just want to jump now to a different part of the story, which is at some point, Bill McKibben is starting the Do the Math tour. And he's going to open it up here. And it is proposed that we have our Green Ribbon Commission take a look at, listen to him, have a conversation with him. We were updating our climate action plan. And I actually served on the first Green Ribbon Commission. And one of the things it did was it kind of radicalized me on climate change. I've been acting within the Sierra Club And I always thought we should just work on whatever issue was a good issue that was supported by our membership, that would make a difference. So I worked on wilderness, we worked on salmon protection, we worked on sprawl, worked on wild river protection. And what I realized was with climate change that was an overarching issue. You couldn't protect a place anymore. You couldn't say, here are the cities where damage is done, but we'll preserve this wild place for the future, because when you change the climate, you change everything. And that actually led me into thinking about how do we change cities? How do we change the way we live? And we all kind of get the ideas about greener buildings, more efficient vehicles, cleaner fuel sources. We have a harder time with the idea of bike lanes and mixed use and apartment buildings. That's a more challenging one to deal with because it really means changing what our city looks like, how our neighborhoods feel, and that's a challenging one as well. And those are the things I started working on. And one of the issues that came up was the roads and transit ballot measure. I was active in the Sierra Club. Once again, there was massive conventional wisdom that the only way that we would ever get light rail was to build billions of dollars worth of new highways. And in the Sierra Club, Mike O'Brien and I, me and Mike O'Brien was the chair, I was the political chair. I recruited him into the Sierra Club too, by the way. We'll talk about organizing in a second. We're like, but it's going to make global warming worse. How can we use the Sierra Club, as much as we love light rail, how can we support a ballot measure that makes global warming worse? That's just totally inconsistent with our values. We ended up running a campaign in which we were all alone, in which the other side had everybody on it, the labor unions, the businesses, and even many of the other environmental organizations, which was a very bitter thing for us, because we didn't want them to come in, right? We wanted them to stay strong with us and convince them to do it differently. And but we weren't going to raise that much money. Like we could raise like 50K or so. We thought we could raise 35. And people were saying, well, how do you run a campaign with 35K? And we organized, right? And we got out there, and we probably didn't think we could win at the front end. But as we attracted other people to our cause, including some people who were pretty smart about how to do campaigns, as we discovered blogs were new then. There was no Facebook. There was no Twitter, right? We actually started arguing on blog comment threads. That was the start of our campaign, right? We were going to be very asymmetrical. We weren't going to buy TV ads. So I just want to talk a little bit about organizing. Because what would happen was if you argued on the blog comment threads, respectfully, factually, about the facts, the writer of the blog would notice the argument. He might pick it up in the blog. If the blogger picked it up, the newspaper reporters were watching this new thing called blogs because their daily papers were getting scooped by the blogs, so they started paying attention to them. It might make it into the paper. And if it made it into the paper, that meant the TV might chase it. So we just were very aggressive. And when the pro side would hold a press conference, Mike would bike there in his raincoat, and show up all wet and ready to go, and we'd get coverage. And it was a very interesting story, too. They spent $5 million, we spent $50,000. Our message was biggest tax increase in Washington state history, and it'll make global warming worse. And I remember something that happened during that campaign. I'm talking about organizing because you guys are organizers, so I'm just going to talk about that in a minute. There's always in any campaign, in any effort, whether it's like, let's get some sidewalks built in our neighborhood, let's do something else, there's usually one or two people that are leaders. And then there's 2 or 3 people who are really loyal and will be with you and will just be hand in hand with you. They drive. And then there's another circle of 5 to 10 to 20 people, and this is the quality of organizing, who become like, they're the loyal helpers. Tell us when you need us. We'll be in there, right? And they leave the strategizing to others. And I remember we had and when it really gets intense, more people have to become leaders. And you train people to become leaders. And I invite you all to take a look at work by Marshall Gans on organizing and the theories of social change. Marshall Gans was an organizer for Cesar Chavez. I really invite you to read. It's all online. I really invite you guys to look at this, okay? It transformed me. I saw it. I heard it for the first time. And I went, oh, yeah, that's what we've been doing. I get it now. It's the recipe book for organizing. And what happened was there was a point at which the people who were that second layer out or third layer out, they said, we realized that you guys that were right at the core, you thought you could win. You thought you could win. We saw it. You weren't just running this campaign because it was the right thing to do and the noble thing to do and you were going to lose. You thought you could win. And when we saw you have that belief, it released so much energy in us. And it was an amazing thing. And by the end of that campaign, we had, because they'd all been arguing in the blog comment threads, we had 15, 20, 30 people who could go do a town hall, who could go do a forum, who could be on social media, who were knowledgeable, and we won that campaign. So it was amazing. But one of the things that always troubled me about it was people would argue, but the light rail is good, right? And doesn't that offset the highways? And that kind of brings me back then to Bill McKibben coming to brief us on what he was doing. Because what he said was so simple and straightforward, and I know many of you know it, which is there's all of this carbon beneath the ground. And if we burn it, we're going to change the atmosphere. We can only burn so much more of it. And it's like really simple. So you can get greener here, but if you burn more there, it doesn't help, right? And ultimately, you have to leave that carbon in the ground. So how do we, as a society, say that we're going to continue to invest in and support companies whose entire business model is built upon profiting from taking those things from beneath the ground and burning them? But the clarity of that really struck me when I listened to him that day. Right? It really struck me. There was a real clarity to that I got. And so that afternoon I met with our finance guy and tried to understand where do we have money. So we have cash reserves. So that's pretty easy. No cash reserves, nothing in fossil fuels. We have self-directed retirement accounts. So we're trying to come up with self-directed retirement accounts. And we have a pension fund, which is controlled by a pension board, not me. So we can ask them to divest. And I made a commitment then that we would do all of these things as the mayor. Now we're going to need the council, we're going to need the rest of the pension board. And there's a conventional wisdom here too, right? Well, it's not a prudent financial thing to do, right? Because we have to protect the pensions of our retirees, existing retirees and future retirees. And state law and other law says you have to get the best financial return. But one of the things I took away from the last conference was, how do you, when everybody knows you have to leave the stuff in the ground, is that a prudent financial investment to say we're going to count on returns from something that we as a society think shouldn't be burned? Where will be the profits if we find the political will and the regulatory will to no longer mine it, drill for it, and burn it? There won't be profits. That doesn't sound very prudent, right? Now the other alternative is, well, we will make profits and everybody will do great and the atmosphere will be really dramatically changed. That one doesn't add up to me. So we hear this, isn't it, don't you have to worry about your fiduciary duties to your retirees and pensioners? And I think, well, don't you have to think about your fiduciary duty to your kids, right, and your families? And so to me, the logic of, but you have to keep doing it because you have to keep making money, because that's what we've always done, it makes me think of the conventional wisdom around nuclear power plants. It makes me think of the conventional wisdom on roads and transit, which is everybody knows you can never get transit unless you agree to all the highways. It turned out politics can actually change. Right? You can actually change political reality. I remember we were having that argument in roads and transit. People will say, well, the political reality is you'll never get light rail unless you agree to all the highways. And Casey Golden from Climate Solutions says, well, what about actual reality? Right? Actual reality is if we keep burning fossil fuels, we're going to change the planet's atmospheres in ways that are unpredictable and very dangerous. Right? That one we can't actually negotiate with. It's not as if we say, hey, Mother Nature, can you just hold off a couple of years? We've got a few highways to build, then we want to negotiate how quickly you're going to move. That's actual reality. Political reality is something that moves. And I point to any other number of social movements where political reality changed through organizing. The civil rights movement. The abolition movement, right? Abolitionists were these crazy religious people from the North, right? That was just unreal that they would argue that. You know, civil rights, you know, the same thing. So we're in the same type of thing that once was, well, gay marriage, legalization of pot. At a certain point, something happens when enough people think about it, argue about it, organize around it, that it can flip. And that's where we're at the very beginning of this with the divestment movement. At the very beginning of this idea that we should just leave it in the ground. And none of those movements succeeded because the powerful and the wealthy changed their minds just due to logic. It didn't happen that way. It happened because people organized for change. So that's why I came down when you invited me. Because you were organizing. You guys really blow me away. So keep doing it. We're here. But it's not going to happen because I write a letter to the region. Right? It just isn't. And I'll be happy to at some point. They already know how I feel. Right? But it's going to happen because they hear from everybody that it is not acceptable as a society to base our economy on something that, in the long run, will destroy the planet. And that's going to take a lot of work, but you're just the guys to do it. So thank you.
Thank you.
And I talked longer than I wanted to. I think I'm good to for about another 15 minutes, and then I really do have to take off to get to my next event.
Thank you, though. Thank you. At this point, we're going to open the floor to any and all questions. So if you'd like to just raise your hands and direct them at either of our two speakers, feel free. In the back.
I have a question for, might be happy to hear both your answers, but specifically for Sawant, since you're an economist. Most economists don't think that climate change is a problem. And I was hoping you could speak to that.
Should I use the microphone again?
Sure.
Yeah.
You asked my favorite kind of question. Well, I get to talk about other economists.
For the record, I've got a BA in economics, so I'm this way.
I'm betting you didn't take a class from someone like me.
I did, actually. Juliet Shore.
Juliet Shore is a social democrat, yeah. She's
Maybe
not
not
that.
quite like you.
No. But she's better than most economists. I can tell you. That's because she's a sociologist in reality who teaches economics. But no, I like to be sure. So yes, most economists actually don't consider climate change, don't think that there is, it's a particular threat. But most economists, the very same economists, also think that unions are evil, and that if poor people are poor because they are lazy, and that the idea of a minimum wage or rent stabilization is really bad, and that it will lead to all kinds of apocalyptic scenarios like just total economic anarchy and so on. So the reality is that, the sad reality is that the economics discipline as a whole, except for some people who challenge the status quo, serves as an intellectual cover for the system that, works in such a way that if you were thinking about it logically as a human being, you would reject it. That's the problem. So, because if left to yourself, you wouldn't really buy into it. The whole idea is to present an argument as if everything you see outside in the real world is untrue, and what I'm teaching you in class is absolutely correct. It's taught in that way. So just to give you an example of what I mean, so when you open any typical economics textbook, which is most economics textbooks, 101, it'll always talk about how the economy functions this way, and so there's not much you can do. This is the market, what can you do? It needs fossil fuel, production needs fossil fuels, and so you're just a bleeding heart or an environmental nut, whatever, if you think that this is a problem. And that's misleading, because treating this the economy that we have today as axiomatic is a problem, because going in, even before you learn anything about the economy, you are going in with this idea that no other type of economic organization is possible. That is the problem. And the reason that a lot of the discipline does not want to talk about climate change is because it poses really fundamental questions about the economy. Because it confronts you with evidence that capitalism has utterly failed to have any kind of solution for the question of climate change, as I said, even though there is so much research that shows that it is actually hugely problematic. So the question is this, the question is research shows that we need, your Divest UW group, what we need, what research shows is that the global economy as a whole needs to divest from fossil fuels. That's the kind of divestment we need to see if we are to have any hope of confronting climate change. But that immediately pits you against very powerful economic interests who have no incentive to restructure the economy, restructure production into renewable energy. So despite all the really well-developed science and developing technology in renewable energy, that shift is not taking place. And the other aspect of this is, real shift from fossil fuel-driven production to renewable energy-driven production and economy requires genuine global cooperation. It requires genuine international cooperation. But that is not going to happen with this economic paradigm that we have, because the more industrialized countries are going to dominate over poor countries, and the whole, climate change debate has just not allowed for that real discussion to happen about what do we need. We need global collaboration in order to bring down carbon emissions, and that's not going to happen. But I'll stop there. I can talk more.
Yeah.
Thank you.
So, Mike, I now want to test your theory at some point, and I want to go home and Google what economists think about climate change. Because when I think about that, what I think about is, how do you, there are externalities, and how do you internalize externalities? Markets don't account well for externalities. That's why political systems have to address them. That's one. And the big externality here is, the tragedy of the commons, right? That individuals profit while the common, in this case, our atmosphere, is damaged. So to me, I think economics points to, we've seen this script before, except the stakes are much higher. As to whether or not we can globally cooperate in order to address this, I feel like I have a choice between hope and no hope, and I'll pick hope on that one, just because the alternative just isn't very palatable to me. Other questions? Why don't you choose?
Yeah, and let's try and keep our responses brief to respect the time of our speakers and the people here. Go ahead.
Yeah, I wanted to thank Kshama for asking a really obvious question about our transit system in Seattle and what are we going to do about this. I'm from New York City, so it's pretty incredible to me how convoluted the transportation is here, and there's lots of wealth here. Amazon just moved in to South Lake Union. The whole neighborhood has changed. I've worked down there for 15 years now. I've been in Seattle for 27 years. My commute is a nightmare, and I wonder, why have we rolled out the carpet to these corporations and all the citizens have been impacted by this? Where is the sense in that? They brought 12,000, 15,000 workers to South Lake Union, and we certainly haven't figured out how these people are going to get to work, where they're going to live, et cetera, et cetera. So that's my question.
I would say that when I took office 4 years ago, we had, very high unemployment. Construction industry unemployment was at 30%. What I was hearing from everybody was jobs. And that was pretty important for us to get on that. Now, I think it was like a year or two ago, we were probably saying it's nice to see some cranes. Now we're going, what's up with all those cranes? On the issues of transit, and generally speaking, I think it's better to have job and residential growth in the city than in the suburbs, which is what we historically saw, because the amount of inputs needed to, the cost of supporting that as a society is going to be a lot lower. So, but you're right, we're way behind on transit, and that's, I'm from New York too, and this is, you speak to people here, and there was a vote actually to build a subway system. We didn't, and we went to Atlanta. So I'm pushing as hard as I can for more transit. Part of our challenge here is that our funding for it, whether it's for Sound Transit expansion or whether it's for local taxes that we could use for expansion, Kshama's been pushing for a millionaire's tax for transit. All of our choices, I don't get to invent new taxes at the city level. Any tax that I enact is one that has to be pre-approved at the state legislature. And in order for them even to approve a tax for us, Just like I was talking about, they held transit hostage to roads, in the roads and transit, they're now holding our metro system hostage to their new highways. And they're going to hold sound transit hostage to their new highways. And this is a statewide issue where we really need, to change the politics around these things. And I personally believe we should have a county tax on transit or a city tax on transit if that's what it takes for us to control our own destiny on this. There's no way we're going to be able to support a job and housing growth in the city without mass transit. We just can't do it.
Kshama, you want to add anything?
Sure. So yeah, the question on transit is very important. But I think it's important for us to also highlight that there is, creating jobs and, developing an environmentally sustainable program are not mutually exclusive. As a matter of fact, statistics show that, with a shift to renewable energy, actually jobs that can be created for every 1 million that's invested in renewable energy as opposed to, million invested in fossil fuels creates jobs 3 to 1. And so the numbers are pretty clear that actually we could have jobs and, green economy. And what we need at every level, I don't think we should be passing the buck. I think we should, at every level, we could call for, and this is what we would be calling for, is a city-wide, publicly funded, green living wage unionized jobs program. And some of those jobs could be transit related. It could be construction and repair. It could be bus drivers and other maintenance services. It could be any number of jobs that can be created through a green jobs program. And that's precisely what we have to target, because one of the arguments, or perhaps the only argument that the pro-coal terminal people have, is that it creates a few unionized jobs, and that is how they got the State Labor Council to sign off on that. And the reality is that the number of jobs it's going to create are so small. Once you start accounting for the jobs that are going to be destroyed once the coal terminal is put there, and the small businesses that are going to be wrecked, and the people who are working there in the small businesses and the small business owners themselves. And so we have to point out that it's actually necessary for job creation that we move away from fossil fuels and for a green jobs program. And in terms of taxes, I think we can, this can be done in an excise tax format. This can be done. And whether it can be done or not, it should be a secondary question, because first of all, it's important to start that debate. When was the last time you all remember we had a real discussion on these issues before this election year? And I think that has a lot to do with our campaign and also fast food workers. And as far as externalities are concerned, I think that's the problem with this economic system, that the costs, the social and environmental costs, are externalized to the process of private profit making. Therein lies the problem. And that's why we need to have a fundamental discussion.
Thank you. One question in the middle here.
Oh, yeah. So, I don't know if it's a very well-formed question, but I'll try anyway. So, when I listen to especially economists and others talk about these issues, right, what everyone seems to be alluding to, and what I find to be the case, is that the change to mitigate climate change in the right kind of way, in a fundamental way, right, as Dr. Sawant pointed out with regard to how drastically we have to reduce it, and when that kind of thing even came close to happening, fundamentally it just seems, the point is we have to give things up, right? Like, there are going to be things that we have to, like the indulgences that we have in the West, right? We just have to lose certain of them. But that, to me, is a politically unstable strategy, right? To say to the citizenry, you just have to give things up. So that's what I said. It's not a very well-formed question. But
No, it's actually a fabulous question.
Well, it didn't have a question mark at the end.
No, that's okay, because you just, well, what do you think about that, right? So we got that. And I'm just going to give an answer that is probably insufficient to the question, and then I'm going to have to depart, and you'll just have to excuse me. I have another event this evening, and I'll be happy to come back for some other type of forum and Q&A, in the future. You guys just let me know, okay? We are talking about a fundamental restructuring of how we use stuff. But what I'd say is it wasn't that long ago that we did have that. right? I mean, you don't have to look that far back in history to see when we built towns where everybody lived within walking distance of the workplace and the shops and the community gathering places. You know, and if you lived further away, maybe you didn't travel in that often, right? I mean, it wasn't that long ago. I mean, you look at your classic Main Street, right, of a town that was been built, you know, say 100+ years ago, and what you had was the stores, and you had apartments right above it, and then there were maybe apartment buildings behind it, and the offices were on the second floors, and then behind it were slightly larger houses, and then bigger houses, and then there was the mill, right, somewhere in town. It was a mill town. So if you really, we're not that far removed from that. We've become very accustomed, and we say that, well, I couldn't possibly live without my car. We say it. So I'll give an example. I bike mainly because it became a convenient way to get around. I got in exercise, et cetera, et cetera. But it's amazing how much I restructured my life. It's harder as mayor. Mayor, I'm in the car more than I'd like to be. But as an individual, how much more I just restructured my life. It's like, well, if I'm going to meet you in the U district, it's going to be the end of the day on my way home. Right? And there was all sorts of that. So I'm just giving these as examples. Because when you think about what fundamentally makes life good to live, right? It's health, it's family, it's community, you know, it's good food and drink. You know, that's there our happiness lies. So yeah, we are talking about fundamental restructuring of how we live, how we get around, how we power our devices, you know, but I have to hope we have the inventiveness and creativity to do that while simultaneously rediscovering the things that used to give us a great degree of fulfillment before we were driving around. And I don't know about you, but I wouldn't mind spending a little less time in the car overall anyway. And that's one of the things I discovered about when I changed how I got around. So that's not a full answer, and it doesn't, and I don't mean in any way to minimize the extraordinary changes we're talking about, right? And how difficult it will be for us to even reimagine our future in this way. But again, you know, even 50 years ago, would we have thought I mean, this was Dick Tracy stuff, right? That we were carrying this around in our hands. Did I just date myself? I think I did. The older folks are smiling. Thank you all. I really do have to run.
Thank you.
Thank you. Can I actually start by responding to that one? Which I think that's a very, even though you didn't think it was a well-formed question, it's actually perhaps the most important, or one of the most important questions to ask, which is, what will it take to move into a new economic situation with renewable energy, and what will we have to give up? And I think, first of all, it's yes, we should acknowledge that this economy, the capitalist economy, does push just a really surreal level of hyper-consumerism on entire cultures. And so if you can see how the more, like I come from India, which after we through the British imperialists out, the government was not socialist, but it was formulated on social democratic principles, meaning there was public funding for sewage and sanitation and public education. Like I'm a product of the government, making a very systematic policy of literacy programs for girl children, and so I paid nothing for my education almost through college, and So in India, you see that since then, a lot of the social democratic programs have been dismantled, and the neoliberal era was ushered in. This is all still capitalism, but because of that, you see more of a capitalistic culture arriving in India. And so, in the last 10, 20 years, you can see more of that hyper-consumerism. People who didn't, the older generations they didn't even know what a credit card is, and now there is that whole thing that is being driven. But the reality is that it's not, I wouldn't call consumerism or the need to drive away from consumerism an individualistic choice. because regardless of however much we all, let's assume that everybody in the industrialized world decided that they wanted to go towards, personal choices of, let's say everybody became super healthy and biked everywhere and composted like crazy and recycled, which is all, I don't need to have a glib tone about it. It's all absolutely something we should do. And I do that too, as a socialist. I don't laugh at that. But again, as an economist, you have to look at what impact does that have. And I think one of the things that we should talk about to put this whole thing in perspective, and until we arrive at a real solution, which I can tell you is not consumer choices, is not the real solution. And the simple reason is this. If you look at what needs to be done in terms of global environmental sustainability, in theory, it will require massive changes in consumer choices. However, we are also, capitalism, the same system that pushes hyper-consumerism on the tiny segment of the global population that actually has money to spend, is the same system that ensures that the vast majority of humanity is in extreme poverty. So to go and tell the billions of people, including the millions in the US, tens of millions of people who are extremely poor in the US and are facing food shortage and basic problems, to go and tell them that they have to change their consumer choices doesn't make sense, in the sense that what are you going to tell a really poor woman in India, in rural India? What is she going to change? The problem, in fact, I think is the opposite. The problem is that under capitalism, you have this dual scenario where you have extreme consumerism being forced on you, even though you don't want to make that choice. Like not having mass transit and being forced to drive a car. That's a choice you don't have. And on the other hand, having billions of people actually facing a chronic problem of underconsumption. If you look at the goods and services that you would need as what would you like? You would like plumbing, running water, clean streets, clothing, decent clothing, decent housing, decent education, a little bit of entertainment and leisure, the ability to go to parks and even fly to other places to visit your family. All of the things that you think about as a consumer, virtually none of these are available to billions of people. So the consumption or consumer argument actually does not work if you scale it to the scale that you need to actually address climate change. And then ultimately, you're forced to confront, whether you like it or not, you're forced to confront that we need systemic changes in terms of production. And so if I can tell you very quickly, what would that alternate world look like? What would a socialist world, for example, look like? We will actually reduce the energy consumption. We will. But that's not because standards of living will be lower. We're not talking about equal but poor. Poverty actually is an enemy of environmental sustainability. We actually need a really good standard of living for everybody. But that's not possible with a system that pushes for private profit. And so what we need is sustainable choices so that everybody's standard of living is elevated. So I would say, if somebody asked me what is my idea of a good standard of living, I would say the ability to not have to drive my car. That would be a part of a good standard of living. But I don't get that in the most developed country in the world. So it really shows you that we have to really, I don't use this term often, but you really have to think outside the box. You really have to reimagine what a world would look like, which is capable of offering a really good standard of living to everybody, and yet run the economy in a sustainable way. And they're not mutually exclusive, but it's not going to happen under capitalism.
Thank you. I'm going to take one more question. Respect time. If you have to go, feel free. We've obviously run over a bit, but if anyone has any last questions, now would be the time. Yes.
So, what's the alternative for the innovative entrepreneur? If you're diminishing the profit, what incentive does somebody have to start a startup that's creative in a good way, like a green startup, if their profit incentive is gone?
Right. I think that's also another important question to think about. What are the incentives under capitalism? The reality is that there are several aspects to this. One is that given the way the economy is functioning today, there aren't actually incentives for green businesses. In fact, a lot of green businesses that do want to start don't get the startup funds because the economy is really fantastically dominated by global giants, and oil corporations, fossil fuel corporations are some of the wealthiest and really some of the most prominent corporations that drive policy making everywhere. And they drive the economy as well. I mean, they decide what happens in the economy. And the reality in general about entrepreneurship is this goes beyond just green entrepreneurs, is that this idea that capitalism encourages innovation and we need capitalism despite all the ills it inflicts on society, because that is the only way that innovation or creativity can be encouraged. I would tell you that to me sounds very reductionist in defining human nature. Human beings are driven by lots of things, and more than anything else, if you just look at human beings in general, not in the context of capitalism, you know what human beings are driven by the most? The need to have respect from your peers. I wanted to, at the risk of going on a little bit, I wanted to tell you a little joke that I often tell my students to explain this point. How many of you watch Seinfeld? Or are you too young to watch that? I think it's sort of all ages, yeah. So, Seinfeld, Jerry Seinfeld has this bit where he says that, when you go to a funeral, the scary thing is if you have to make a eulogy, if you have to give a eulogy. And, people, he talks about how, public speaking, he says, can you believe it? Public speaking is the biggest fear of human beings. Second is death. Can you believe that you're less afraid of dying than speaking for the public? And so he says, and what that means is that if you're at a funeral, you'd rather be the guy in the casket than the guy giving the eulogy. And to me, that little vignette captures how much human beings deeply desire the approval of their peers, and that is I'm just giving you an illustration of what else drives people to do good things, to do innovative things, to do creative things, to show how intelligent they are, to solve a really complicated math problem. It's that, and it's for sheer love of it. If you look at the whole internet revolution that drove the tech boom in the 1990s, there's lots of innovative people who did make profits, but the reality is that the whole internet boom was based on a lot of research that was done in people's garages or in the Department of Defense. Ironically, I'm not advocating for, this is not an advocacy for military spending, but my point is that there are lots of brilliant engineers and software innovators who were just doing their salary jobs. They didn't make millions, and that was not that was driving them. It was the sheer pleasure of solving a complicated analytical problem that was driving it. And I think that is true for a lot of people. So my point here is that human beings are complex creatures. There's lots of things we can be. The same person can be selfish, altruistic, compassionate, self-interested, whatever. The problem is that the traits that are emphasized, what trait of all of those traits is emphasized depends on the kind of system we live in. And this system emphasizes selfishness. I mean, I'll give you a simple example. If you go to find a job, especially in this recession, you know that there are hundreds of others who are looking for the same job. You have every right to be able to put food on your table and get that job. You have every right to fight for that job. But if you get that job, it automatically means that those 400 other people are not going to get that job. Is that your fault? No. The system is forcing you to act in a way because the system does not create enough jobs. It's the same with innovation. In reality, lots of creativity and innovation remains unexplored. It's one of those, it's like, in science, you can't measure the unmeasurable. So we don't know how many people out there whose creativity was never saw the light of day because they never got the opportunity, because starting a business is very, very hard. For every small business storefront that you see on Broadway, there's dozens others that either never saw the light of day or went out of business because it's very hard to stay solvent. And there's only a few key people who are rewarded, who get immensely rewarded. And then once you get rewarded, you get more and more rewarded, and the rewards get consolidated at the top. And think about all the children who, I come from Mumbai, and one of the sites that you'll see there is millions of children, little children who grew up on the streets, and who grew up into a life of, scavenging through landfills in extreme danger, actually. And who's to say that one of these kids could not have, brought out some creative idea that would have benefited humanity? So I think that we should force ourselves to come out of this idea that is forced on us that, this system is the only system that will encourage innovation. Actually, we can do much better.
Coming on 2 days' notice, it was crazy putting this together, but it's awesome to see everybody here so passionate about these issues. So thank all of you. If anyone has any more questions and wants to go up to the front and talk to either us or Dr. Sawant, feel free. Other than that, thank you again.